believe how many. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Brandei Estes. I am head of photographs for Sotheby's in Europe, Middle East, and Asia, and I'm currently based in London, and really excited that you can all join myself and Cig Harvey, who is here, of course, with me, and Cig is in Maine. Cig is a British-born artist and writer living in Maine in America, and works in large format color photography and poetry. Her work is deeply rooted in the natural world and very much about emotions and feelings and our relationship to nature. Cig has published five sold out books, including this one, which is one of my personal favorites, Blue Violet. And Cig's work has been collected, and her books, in numerous museums, institutions around the world. And many of you may have come across Cig's work at a number of photo exhibitions and festivals and fairs, including APAD and Photo London. And we're very lucky, everyone in London who's able to join this year, the Fair Photo London, as Peter Federman, also a British national living in America, living in Santa Monica. Peter is bringing Cig's work to Photo London this year, so very exciting. And yes, the talk this evening is really to discuss Cig's creativity and her approach to her art through her images and her books. And we have received a number of questions so far. And if anyone would like to leave a question in the comments box, we will leave time to address them at the end of our discussion. So again, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Photo London. And over to you, Cig. Thank you for agreeing to speak with us at the fair. And we had spoken, of course, before in the lead up to this talk, and I thought it was good if we started back at the beginning, and if you gave everyone a sort of context, the elevator pitch, how you started, how you moved to the States, and where that led you to in your work.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Brandei. Brandei and I met last year, and instant great friends. We met at Perry Photo, and so this is a real delight, and I'm so honored to be here, invited to have this discussion with you, and also to Photo London. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I always get a little sweaty palmed. I dressed up for everyone today because I just want to do a good job, and I feel like I've been so lucky to live this life in photography. My love of photography is deep. I'm in it forever. You know, I've been sort of quite single-minded in the way that I've approached how I'm going to spend my days, and I'm just so grateful. And I always come back to that. Like, photography, it always just gives, right? It never takes away. It always gives. You never go out with your camera and come back saying, I wish I hadn't done that. It just opens up so many opportunities to meet new people, to see the world in a different way. It's such an extraordinary medium that I always get a little nervous before these talks, because I just want to do a good job, because I love this medium so much. So thank you also to Peter Federman Gallery for taking my work to Photo London. I'm really honored. So I'm going to share my screen, if that's okay, Brandei.
Please do, yeah.
Okay.
And just to say, I totally agree with you and have the same love for photography. I've worked for 20 years, 21 years, and for most of that, 18, 19 years in photographs. And whilst I'm not a practitioner, I'm not an artist, I have such a deep love for the medium and for artists, and it's given me so much professionally and personally. So I'm right there with you.
Yeah. To spend this life making something that didn't exist before, you know, these ideas and thoughts, and then somehow putting them into pictures. I think that's an extraordinary way to live. So whether people like your work or they don't like your work, it doesn't matter. It's the joy of the making. And that's sort of what I want to speak most most to today. And you know, I'll use my work as examples, Brandei, but what I'm really hoping is that maybe there's a few kernels, a few ideas that people will take and translate into their own work. That's the only reason I think we're doing this, is to sort of just spread the love of photography and creativity. So I'm going to show a few pictures from the 90s where I really sort of dropped down and sort of found my voice. And a lot of people ask me, well, how did that happen for you? And the best news and the worst news is that your voice and your work, your projects are inside of you. We don't pick our projects from a tree. They're right there inside of you. You just have to make enough so it comes out. And that's something I truly believe in. And so I started making work. I sort of shut myself off from the world in many ways and made work in one room and thought about this sort of language of metaphor and symbols. I was so curious with this idea that museums, the walls aligned with these stories, these sort of secret stories, metaphor, symbol. What does a cardinal mean? What does a closed bud mean in front of a closed door? And so this language that could be sort of hermetic, mysterious, but also very beautiful. For me, it was like this new way of working to make something that was unseen seen. And I sort of believe that the language of creativity is a language of repair. I still believe that now, of fostering sort of conversation. I think that art, while it doesn't necessarily save the world, it reminds us and it grounds us, like poetry, what it is to be human, and to find connection within sort of each other. I mean, if you think about it, we all go through betrayal, love, desperation, hope, fear, insecurities. And so I started putting this in my photographs. And so this started really sort of early on. And I would work in these long mind maps, and I would brainstorm and think about every type of light, every type of metaphor, symbol, landscape, and try and think about how could I tell a story that was about a betrayal through photographs. So thinking about, you know, not only the symbols and how this, you know, like the pear, for example, could be a self-portrait, but also it's sort of its placement within the frame. And it became this construction, this mind mapping, this journaling that a few people have asked for me to talk about today. But that is still my practice now, 30 years later. And I sort of love that I sort of keep coming back to this way of working that is, it's simple. It's sort of getting what is inside out. And I think that for me was the most inspiring idea of living as an artist, is that your work is inside of you. Figure out what you're obsessed with, what you're passionate with, each and every one of you on this Zoom call, and make work about that. You know, we change, I think, much less than we think we change. And just this idea that who you were as a child, who you were in your 20s, 30s, 70s, it's all somehow related. And to sort of get it out there through painting, photography, writing, it's sort of, I think, an extraordinary way to live. It's sort of this mark making, this sort of what gets left behind. But also, yeah.
Can I ask, which came first for you? Was it writing? Was it photography, or was it painting? Was it this primarily like the first exposure through museums, I'm assuming with paintings, and then how that influenced your thinking? But obviously poetry and writing is so key to who you are as a creative. So which came first, or did they all sort of come at the same time?
No, definitely photography. First and foremost, it's photography. You know, I do consider myself a writer, and that is a huge part of my practice now. But I fell in love. I used to live in Exeter in Devon. I grew up there. My mum and my sister still live there. And I would work at the Gandy Street Art Centre. And I would work in the darkroom every Saturday and Sunday. I would make a lot of tea, change chemicals. And for me, the alchemic sort of process of photography, particularly printmaking, particularly the darkroom, that red light, the music, the sort of starting with nothing at the beginning of the day and walking home with a box of prints. That to me was my first love. And I really wanted to be a documentarian. I loved street photography. That was my first love all through my teens. And then it just sort of happened that when I sort of turned in, you know, when I'm in my 20s, I sort of turned to a more inward way of making work. But I think that
your palette here is black and white. So your early work, you're more focused on black and white.
Yeah. And so the writing for me was just a matter of sort of getting out more ideas. So it was a way to access more pictures, the same as doing yoga, right? It's like a way, how can I make more pictures? Or how can I, you know, everything is in service for this obsession with making photographs. So the writing then, it was only when I published my first book in 2010, many years later, that I realized that the words and photographs functioned in a sort of a different way together and sort of added up to more than the sum of their parts. And it became important that they were both shown together. But, you know, this love of photography is always my first and true love. And so I would read Robert Adams, thinking about the landscape as metaphor. That was a first for me. I'd never wanted to be a landscape photographer. I thought a photographer. It wasn't the sort of genre. And then I realized it could be this metaphor. And this photograph, you know, here is such how I was feeling inside. And so I sort of went out into the world sort of and voraciously tried to explore different ways, different lights, different symbols to talk about this sort of story. So for me, the story always comes first, or the idea. And that's gone on through my entire career. Whenever I get stuck, I really sort of look at, well, what am I going through? What's happening around me, either in the politics, either in the world or personally, and that's where I always sort of land, and it becomes the source of the pictures. So this, for example, was what I did with, you know, his words. This is a love story in many ways.
And these works were taken, what sort of time period were these done?
So over a period of 3 or 4 years, and I really sort of kept it to myself. I use Mozart here as a surrogate. And, you know, and I kept it to myself. I didn't, and someone had asked me a question to address, you know, this idea of when do you share work, social media, and I still feel like the newest work I'm making right now, I really try and treat it like a kid, and I don't put it out there in the world straight away for someone to criticize, because it almost needs, you need to have a sort of sense of, I think, you know, confidence of just, I'm sure of this work. I know that might not be everyone's cup of tea, but it's, for me, it's the right work. And so that comes, I think, with a little bit of time. Same with writing. You know, I always think I come back to things, I step away, give it some time and space. You know, even if that's a few weeks, or, you know, maybe it's a few months, maybe it's a year or two, but to not put it out there for sort of everyone's opinion right away, I think is really valuable. Because if you get no likes, or people don't, you know, start sort of saying, oh, that's not working for me, I think as an artist, to be authentic for yourself, you have to have this sort of tenacity, and also this sort of knowing inside, well, it's right for you, you know?
Absolutely, this confidence. But as you said, it can take time, and even if, I mean, people are so critical, and it must be really difficult to remain, to keep that inner peace and calmness, and you have to have a really good inner compass and know who you are, I imagine.
Yeah, and I think just really being really sort of thinking of the you know, artwork as, or anything you make, the photographs you make, as being this sort of part of you that someone said to me, Arno Minkinen said to me maybe 35 years ago, he was like, you have to be the best guardian of your images. And it's always stayed with me that it's not, they're not you, but they're a part of you. And you know, in the same way you would perhaps treat your kid, you know, to nurture it, and to give it energy, give it space to grow before you sort of put it out there for everyone else to sort of give an opinion on. So in the sort of early 2000s, I started working in color, and color for me was this sort of, I've always loved color, and it was about sort of coming back to how I was as a child, how we see in color, and I sort of exploded into the world of color photography, and it really more and more as the years go by has become this obsession that I'm still trying to understand. My latest work is all about sort of the cultural, historical, biological effects of color on the body. It's something that I think it can be dismissed as being purely decorative. And that is my fight right now, that there is something so inherently important about color and beauty, and using photography as a way to get to that. So I continued making this work, and it was primarily living in Maine. I had moved to Maine at that point, and I just sort of got to work. The landscape of Maine is quite similar to Devon. Instead of moorland, it's we had the blueberry barrens, and it became this place where I could start putting secrets in pictures. And that's another thing I would say to people, like, if you start making the work being so much about the ideas, putting secrets in pictures, putting these stories behind it, then it sort of drives itself, and it becomes less about what other people think. And this is your story. This is your way to make sense of the world. Order out of chaos, beauty out of pain, making work, making something that is this sort of legitimate 3D piece of paper that somehow shows how you feel inside, Photographs, I think, are just this like bucket where we pour in, and all artwork and books, literature, painting. For me, I've only been sort of in the world of photography and writing, but it's the same thing of just this, like, the camera is an expensive pencil. It's what you have to say that's important,
And of course, the editing, what you choose to put out there, because I mean, that must be, an enormous part, and be something that keeps you up at night thinking, do I release this image? Am I publishing this? Is this a fine artwork print that's going to my gallerist? That must be really hard to edit, or is it not? Does it come quite naturally to you?
Well, I think I'm really sort of very normal in the fact that I love books, and most people I think on this call this afternoon, like, books are our thing. Photography and books go together like tea and biscuits, right? I mean, they just do. And so for me, I was obsessed with getting my first book. Like, no one was going to stop me, and I still feel that way. So for me, I sort of mark portfolios in my books. But I was making books. I make handmade books. I make one-of-a-kind books. So I mean, I think for me it was really important that I had a sort of published book with a respected publisher. But I was still making books anyway, and I think that's a beautiful thing about books, is that they're so democratic, and you can make one-of-a-kind and artist books and zines, and just seeing your work, especially if you're interested in text. As well, seeing how it goes together, this idea of sequencing, the way an image refers to each other, refers back on each other. So for me, I think that I always think first and foremost, okay, this is a book, and somehow all the work I'm making right now, even though it might not be obvious, and even though the projects sometimes overlap and feel like they don't go together, I have to trust the process, that it is a cohesive body of work. And then it comes to, so typically when I'm making work, my studio is, I'm in my studio. This is just a little room in a house, and I painted the wall, but my kitchen's right there. And I'm constantly back and forth between, like, a domestic life and a creative life, and the two sort of go together. And for me, that's really important. When I have a studio, and if I go there to like make pictures, I get there and I've forgotten my phone or a charger or my favorite pen. And so for me, it doesn't work that way to have. I like this sort of this soup and stew of mixing.
Right, it's all interwoven. Yeah,
exactly. And then, but then when it comes to a book, I need a completely massive empty room, and I'm going to start, editing and piecing it all together, and it's like this like terrible jigsaw puzzle, one of those shades where it just is impossible, and you think it's never going to happen, it's not going to fit together, and somehow it does. Somehow it all comes together in the end, and oftentimes you have to edit out and lose some of your favorites for that. But I think that that part of the process of sort of knowing that it all will somehow fit together is a really important one. And I mean, I think a lot of us spend tons of time making pictures, like we obsessively make pictures, but we don't spend much time analyzing what we've made or why we were so drawn to that landscape, or why going to this river or this group of people, and for me, that's the feast. That's like the beautiful part of photography.
We just had well, it's still online, but we've just had a beautiful Mary McCartney show at Sotheby's, and she talks about some of the images. She's like, I don't remember taking those, you know, and it's that that sort of, it's so inherent to her. She's always with the camera. She's always taking photographs, that it's just, it's her life. And they're not always, I think some works are more, for her, more considered and thought out, but a lot of them, she doesn't even realize that she's taken them until she looks at her contact sheet and goes, wow, what's that? Interesting. No, that's sort of just how it's so natural.
You know, I think photography is the only medium, and this is why most photographers are terrible about speaking about their work, is that it's so intuitive, I think, you know, because there's this sort of camera, the technical side of photography is fairly straightforward. You know, it's not that complicated, right? It's an aperture and a shutter speed, essentially. So it's like we have this subject matter. It's the only art form that's so tied to subject matter. We take pictures of things, but it's about the things that it's really interesting, right? And so I think that we can work in this really intuitive way. But for me, the joy, and I do that, I always carry a camera, and sometimes my shoots are really labored. I know, like this last picture, this took me 5 years to make. I knew the model, Devon, my friend, who I wanted to work with. I knew this location. The fireflies are only there 2 weeks of the year when the wind's just right. So there were all these sort of constraints, and it took me years to make. And so I think that, and then other times I have pictures like the Emmy in the truck, the one where it was snowing, one frame. And I think, it's that analyzing afterwards of like, well, how are these two pictures connected? That's what I really love. And that's what I sort of really encourage people to do with their own work, is to think about the projects, the pictures they were making 10 years ago, how they're related to what they made yesterday. And I promise you there's somehow a link. And that's beautiful to realize that there's this like a life in photography being lived. So these are a few pictures from my third book, Gardening at Night. And this is this perfect example for what we're talking about. I was utterly exhausted. I just had my daughter scout, and I wasn't writing. I wasn't, mind mapping and planning out, constructing pictures. I was just responding with the camera. Half of the time it was, it was like 4 a.m. and I was up, and I didn't make any pictures when I was actually pregnant, or made very few. It was probably the least time of in my life where I've made the littlest, but I feel like I put all that creative energy into making Scout. And then when she came out, I was determined to make pictures every day. And after about a year, this project came out, and it sort of revealed itself. But I sat and I looked, and I would have date nights, and I would cover the walls, with all these photographs, and like think about what they were telling me. Why did I make that? Why am I so drawn to this land or to these reflections? And what I noticed was it was like this cycle of life was happening, that nature was leading the way. My kitchen table was full of manuals with like how to look after a kid. It wasn't necessarily intuitive, but what came out in my pictures were all this, just this like intuition, seasons, time. I mean, I always say that photography, it's so connected to time. It's our currency. Cartier-Bresson was always like, add up all the increments, the 60th of a second, 125th, 250th. An entire life's work is, in my case, I added it up recently. I had a nerd moment, 6 seconds. And you're talking about dying and living, and it's like tiny amounts when you add up all these like shutter speeds. And also it goes back to that idea of the camera, that which camera should I use? And, I don't know if you feel this, but you should use the one that you have with you. And if that's an iPhone, then fantastic, especially the newer models, you can print, huge files from them. If, these posh cameras are no use if they're just sitting on a shelf, right?
Absolutely.
And, and just almost taking like this idea again of a life in photography. It's like you notice what you're noticing when you start analyzing what you made pictures of each day,
I love this image. Oh my gosh.
Thanks.
This is I think this was one of the first images of yours that I saw. And I just, when you see something and it hits you and you can't forget it. It's ingrained on, it's burnt on my retina. I love this. Is that scout in the photograph?
It is. And it was like one image made, because she was off. And that was good for me too, to move fast. But, again, it's this color, isn't it? I mean, color, we know it's a scientific fact that color affects the body. It raises the heart, and red has been used through cultures since the beginning of time. So I really think that this color is what is sort of hard to look away from in this picture, I think, this color.
I find in a lot of your work, color's the protagonist, that's the main factor, that you're describing the color through what's happening but it's the color that really, is saturated, beautiful, dense color is really key.
I think it sort of comes back to this, like, I'm a maximalist, I'm an optimist, I have this voracious appetite to live. It's maybe my sort of last time around this planet, I don't know, but I just feel like I want to feel it. And it comes back to the body and the senses, and, as a way to like feel more and to be in the world, what it is to be human, I think.
Yeah.
So this work was all around this time, was all about sort of putting down roots in Maine, having a family, questions of, what is a life? And this is my husband. And I also love how optically the camera sees things differently than our eyes. And that's something that, I love in historical work, and what is something I'm always looking for. And here the firewood becomes this sort of dog holding, the gun or something like that, that it becomes this safety here, and then, this is a few pictures from Orchestra Bomb, my third book. And I was in a car accident driving home from the dentist one day, going to pick up Scout a mile from my home. And I heard once that most accidents happen a mile from your home, and it's always stayed with me. And then this happened, and the cars were written off, someone T-boned me. And it really deeply affected me. And I made this body of work pretty quickly. Normally, most books take 4 or 5 years for me. This I made in 2 years, and it came out of me like voracious. I didn't intend to make work like this, but it was everywhere I looked. There was like heaven and hell and things on fire and things, exploding and changing. And it was all, there in the work. And I think it comes back to, that there's something about photography, there's something so incredible about photography that it just touches deeply into our intuition. And that's why we have such a hard time like describing the work, because you didn't make it from the intellect, you made it from the body, you made it from the gut.
And so this was published in 2017.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And these are my stepfather's teeth. I stole them from him while he was sleeping. He's like a late morning person, gets up, and I saw them in the bathroom, and I was like, oh my God, it fit perfectly with all these pictures that I were making that were about, death and living, and what was said and what was unsaid, and, and sort of seizing the day. And so I moved every morning. I made these, I took these teeth on a photo shoot around the house. When I was making this work, it was also 2016, Trump had just been elected. And for me, and then I had this 3-year-old who was, she was 4, so magical. And the way she saw the world, and had synesthesia, and would like, this cake tastes like pink. And she would like, just the way she observed the world was so magical. And then I would turn on the radio and just hear like just it's complete opposite, just, you know, hate and fear. And so for me, this sort of book was so much about public-private as well, this sort of precarious life.
Oh, this is such a strong image. Oh my gosh.
Thank you. I love this image too. It's one of my favorites. People ask what a favorite is, and there's something about this one that I never could have constructed, and it gets me in the gut, I think, this one.
It's also so timeless, the look of it, the aesthetic, the feel. It could be from the 50s, it could be, you know, it's such a timeless image.
Yeah. Thanks. I think there's something about the gesture in it, and the way that a snow, I think, has sort of almost obliterated Scout's eyes, that yeah, it's something that I don't fully understand. And I love that too, of not fully grasping your images. Yeah.
No, I love it. There's something about it that reminds me, although it's a bit menacing, but the kudelka of the dog in the snow at Versailles, sort of looking back.
Yeah.
You know, that
do you own any kudelkas? I see you have a lot of photographs on your wall, Brandei, and I bet there's a kudelka in there. Is there?
No, there isn't. No, not yet. I have a list, and his work is on my list. No, but it's funny. I used to only collect black and white photographs for a really long time. That was the first thing that I bought that I really connected with, and really documentary photography, and then nudes and architectural. And then only, I'd say, in the past 9 years, have I just suddenly embraced color photography, and I love it.
Oh, so, good.
And there was something, and a shift. I was in my early 30s, 10 years ago, and I think something as a growing up as a woman, something shifted, and I just went boom and just sort of embraced color. And now I can't get enough of large color photographs. So I still have all my small black and whites, but I'm so drawn to color photography in a way that I just wasn't before.
You know, I think that's similar. I always say that photography, the photographs you make are like either a balance, so they're the opposite of what you're going through, or a mirror of what you're going through. And I think it's the same for collectors. I remember speaking with Bill Hunt about this and things he collected. And I was like, wow, that really, his collection, if you can kind of put a under a certain title, they all have a sort of level of mystery, and it's all because of the things he's drawn to in his life, you know. So thinking about why you're drawn to the things you want to collect, you know.
And I love portraits as well, and sometimes people come over and go, how do you live with all these people? But I live alone, I've never been married, I don't have children, so it doesn't feel strange for me to have lots of people around me. You know, I quite like it.
Oh yeah, especially when I always think about that, like, what is a timeless portrait? So, and you know, that's a question that I don't think any of us know the answer to, but when you don't have to know the person to know that it touches to the sort of central part of humanity, you know? Absolutely. Yeah. So then this is the last book that you mentioned, Blue Violet, and it was released in 2021 in the pandemic. And it began out of a love letter to my best friend Mary, and she was diagnosed with leukemia. So I see that there is a pattern that I'm taking times of adversity in my work and making work about it. And for me, that comes back to that initial thought of like order out of chaos, beauty out of pain, to make something to sort of try and understand it more. And so she would, you know, she was in a sort of not a bubble room, you know, a hermetically sealed room in Boston at Dana-Farber. And I would send her pictures. It was Maine in the summertime, glorious. And so I wasn't going to send her sort of black and white work, even though I love it. I wanted to send her work that was like, just, so much energy coming off the page in terms of color and living and a feast of work. And so it became this sort of dialogue back and forth. And then I made illustrations for the book in addition to writing, which felt like, that was brand new territory for me. But it was important. I mean, I used flowers as a metaphor, but I could have used cakes. I could have used, people always ask me like, oh, what's your garden like? And I'm not really that good at gardening. I was using them as a metaphor. These are pictures, this work is about living and dying, and flowers tap into so many of our senses, obviously, smell and sight, but also touch. If you've ever touched a petunia, they are the softest thing in the world. Sound. And initially I had, and taste, eat flowers. I had thought about, separating the book by sort of the sense, by chapters. And then I realized that the beauty of life is this sort of integration of all the senses at the same time. And so here's another mind map, everything I could possibly think about flowers. So I looked at, the Victorian England, of how they were used as a language in a repressed society, this secret language, to artists working with flowers, to hose pipes and spades, and but I love looking into this Victorian language. It was actually started by the Ottoman Empire, but was really embraced during Victorian times.
I love this is one of my favorite. This tea is a love letter, the color a lifeline, and it's how to make hibiscus tea.
Yeah, which I just had some. Yeah. So it's really asking people to sort of, to feel more. If you feel more, you're a better guardian of the planet. You're a better guardian you're a better friend, a better, sister, wife, mother, whatever it is, and I do believe that. And it might seem sort of idealistic, but, what's the alternative? And I think it's a more circuitous, circular route to invoke change. I do think of my work as political, even though it's so personal, but it's less didactic. But in a way, it is, fostering conversation, human connection, beauty, commonality, beauty in the landscape. I love that flowers, wildflowers. None of these flowers are particularly posh flowers, where they were either found wild or grown in my garden, grown in friends' gardens. And I sort of love that was really, it's access to beauty without lots of money. It's a way nature, if we're so lucky, I mean, obviously if you live in the city, it's more complicated, but all of us can see the sky and, look at the stars, right?
Absolutely. I mean, for me, I have to give a shout out to Guillaume Pascal of the Little Black Gallery, because he sent this to me in lockdown, and I'm really not exaggerating, it was like a tonic for me, and I just needed to see, this was exactly what I didn't realize I needed. The images, the color, the poetry, the great snapshots of words and thoughts and anecdotes and recipes. It just is, I'm really not exaggerating. This is one of my favorite books of all time. It's so beautiful. And it's, as you say, when you look through it and read the words, you feel alive. And so, and I definitely needed that during lockdown. I needed to be reminded of that. And yeah, I just can't say enough about this.
Oh, thank you so much. It means a lot. And yeah, big shout out to Gile too. I think that, when lockdown first happened, I got this like dreamy assignment from the Times, of which this picture and a couple of others that I've shown were from. And they asked, I think, 12 photographers around the country to say, what does shelter in place, what does lockdown look like to you? And initially I started off like I was making masks and things like that. And I was like, no, I'm not going to make work about this. And I was like, I live in Maine, which is really cold. Like April is so depressing. I was just in England visiting my mum and it was so gorgeous. But April in Maine is not like that. It's like, cold and still winter, not a single leaf on the tree. And so I decided to bring spring inside. So I force forsythia in the bathtub. I filled the kitchen table, and it became, and again, it sort of comes back to photography again, that it really doesn't even matter about the pictures. The act of wanting to do this for a photograph, it made my life better. Photography, it made me, it makes me get up at 5 a.m. when I don't want to. I'm too lazy if I don't have a camera, that this wanting to be a witness to the beauty in the world or something like that is a real drive for me. I like Photoshop work, but it's not for me. I want to make it in camera and stand in front of something and sort of like have that photograph like pinch you, that we're lucky enough to be living. And at the same time, Mary died. She the disease came back, and so this book is in memory of her and her voracious love of life. Yeah.
Oh, beautiful. Just exquisite. And of course, the film that's coming out, Eat Your Flowers.
Eat Your Flowers. No, it's called Eat Flowers. But I like Eat Your Flowers.
Okay. I like Eat Your Flowers. Yeah. Eat Flowers.
Yeah.
And that is really still a love letter to and about your dialogue with Mary when she was ill.
Right. So, but it's like, it's more in many ways, it's like this call to live. I mean, all of us, tomorrow is always different, right? And that's the same. That's what I love about photography, because I think, oh, I'll stop tomorrow. I'll photograph that tree or that person tomorrow. And then tomorrow comes and the trees changed, the weather, it rained and it ruined it or whatever. And it just is such a reminder that time is precious and it's our only currency, and to stop, don't say I'll make that picture tomorrow, make it now, make that phone call to someone now, because things is, constantly changing. So the documentary is just a short, it premieres at Hot Docs, which is a big festival in Canada, on May 1st. And so I think it's hotdocs.com or something, you could find it, but it's a real call to live. So while it came from a place of of loss, it also is about really like seizing the day and not taking things for granted, and paying attention to this sort of beautiful present.
Absolutely. Gosh.
So Matt is we're just releasing it, and it's, if you want to follow on Instagram, I'll be actually posting about it in the next few days, but it's Eat Flowers Film, I think it is. Yeah.
Flowers Film.
Yeah. And then one thing I was just going to end on, I don't know where we are for time, I haven't paid attention, but is when in 2020, when COVID first hit, when we really were scared, remember when it was like terrifying, we didn't know how it was transmitted, there were no vaccines, and then the clocks went back, and then we had a big election, so 2020. And so what I started doing was projecting my work on 80 foot by 40 foot on this building in my town, and I would go down every night. And I'm so lo-fi that I would literally go down, press play. I would change the slideshow every night, press play, and come back and turn it off. And I didn't realize you can do all that remotely, but it was just a simple, people asked me what projector, it was just a simple Epson projector. I don't know why it looked so good, but it looked good. And it was just really wonderful, because for me, it was sort of this highlight of my career, emotional highlight, in the sense that people who weren't necessarily going to an art gallery or a museum or an art fair, they were just driving home from work and they were accosted by, this 80-foot pink, barrage of flowers, or, this text and image and this color at a time when we needed it most. And it became, for me, people would then started, I was supposed to do it 3 nights, and I ended up doing it for 3 months. And people would come and sit, and a woman who I met on Instagram said she used to come after her shift at the hospital. She was a nurse, and she would just cry in a car. And it was just so moving to me that, photographs can do this. So I have a little, I think it's like 45 seconds of it's a time lapse.
Oh, beautiful. Oh, wow.
All right.
Just beautiful. Oh my gosh. Wow, what a treat to for your neighbors, um your fellow townsmen to see that. Gosh, how lovely.
I mean, yes, I suppose, but for me, I couldn't have loved a project more. I mean, it really, it kept me up at night, just like squeezing my fists of, oh, what can I do tomorrow? What can I mean, it really affected me in a beautiful way to just sort of, unfortunately, fortunately, the owners were super lovely and gave me permission to do it. And now a hotel is in that space, so and I've been looking for the perfect white wall ever since, but they're actually very hard to find. But it was, for me, really sort of an emotional highlight to just surprise people with color and light at a time when, it was pretty dark here, literally and figuratively. Yeah.
Well, and of course, right now, you've had, was it in February you opened In Bloom, the show at Fotografiska, where you've got, tell us about that. Is it a gallery with your work in it? Because it's a large group show about flowers and yeah, tell us a bit about that and how that came about.
So, well, that came about through my friend Gile, who a mutual friend, and it's called In Bloom, and it's 12 artists, 12 or 13, who use nature and the landscape in their work as a way of sort of to make people appreciate the world more. And Fotografiska, I think they did an extraordinary job of just creating something visually exciting. Like, they printed some of my photographs really large on fabric that moves. And more in the last, I think, 8 years, I've been working neon. I've been, using, so it's becoming much more installation experience, whereas in the last show at the Gunquit Museum, it was flower, I had loads of flowers in the gallery, which scared the conservators, but I wanted it to smell. I wanted people to brush by flowering mint and to sort of have to deal with what it is to feel. And I think Fotografiska have really tapped into that. I actually think there's a hotel room right in the museum, and you can spend the night in amongst this crazy,
Wow.
beautiful exhibit that's all about what it is to experience nature. I mean, they're really doing some exciting things.
I hope I get to see this show with your work in it. I'm always just so impressed by the scale and, as you say, the installations and the money, the production that they put into their shows. It's incredible, their love and support of the medium and how they show it.
Yeah, I think it's just, and also just this idea of what is a museum now, that it doesn't have to be this sort of cold, removed, conservative, that, I mean, if Fotografiska in New York, you can wander around with a glass of wine and there's a DJ, and it's like this, okay, well, perhaps, making art, and it comes back to making art more accessible, making, like, your pictures, don't be picking a project that you can only do once a year. This idea of just like, of living with art and it not being sort of this reserved thing you look at. It's something you can feel,
Absolutely. No, it's yeah, I'm so impressed by them. Cig, I think we should look at some of the questions.
Yeah, definitely.
We've got about 11 minutes left. We have answered actually quite a few of them as we've been going through.
Yeah.
We've talked about the mind map already, so thank you, Catherine. New projects. How do you start writing about it? I think we've talked about that as well.
So one thing I'll say about that is that, you know, like going out with your camera, I'm just like responding to light. Okay, I'm not analyzing them. Why am I drawn to that tree? I'm just making the picture and I'm bringing it back and to the studio being, well, why was I so drawn to that? And it's the same with the writing. So I will go about my day and a half-heard conversation that someone might have said, I'll take that back and I'll write it. I'll write, you know, I try and write every morning. And then I'll say, okay, I'm going to write about what that one sentence where someone said this, or I'm going to write about that red leaf I saw on the floor when I felt despair. And so it becomes these sort of, I'm taking something I'm observing from the everyday and then coming home and writing to that.
And I guess so, not thinking about it too much, not being too sort of
Right.
conscious and aware, because I guess you could get really sort of tied up in that and lose that intuitive and just natural process.
Yeah, I mean, it always starts off this intuitive thing, and then anything that makes into a book has been rewritten. It looks like it's also journalistic. I mean, sorry, journalist, you know, as in like just fallen off the page, but it's really reworked and rewritten, and there's so much creativity in rewrites. But it comes initially from a real place of intuition.
Yeah. Love that. Question from Nigel about Blue Velvet is the first widely published book of yours, but your earlier monographs are limited and difficult to afford, even if you can find them. Do you have any plans to reissue them at some point?
Yeah, you know, it breaks my heart to see those. I mean, you know, they're $50 books, and they should be 50. You know, that's you know, they're these small books that have a lot of love and heart. But so I hate to see them being sold for like, you know, way more on the secondary market, but that is the nature of it, right? You know, I never say never, you know, but I do love that Monticelli and Faden, they, you know, they are committed to sort of keeping that Blue Violet in print, at least for the, you know, we're in our third printing now, and that, you know, because it's painful to see a book that's $1,000 when it should be 50. I totally agree. So maybe there'll be a release, but no plans right now. Yeah.
Thank you. Next question from Kent. Can you talk more about the interplay of serendipity, intuition in the context of your constructed images?
Yeah, I mean, I really, if I only make the constructed images, my world gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and it starts to feel forced. So if I work alongside and make intuitive images that just, I'm out there with my camera always and just responding to the world, for me, working in both styles, that it expands the world and the pictures grow for that. So, you know, if you know what you're going to make before you start, then you're missing out on all the gorgeousness of creativity. Because I think, you know, the planning and the construction, it's just a place to start, so that when you know, Saturday comes around and you can give some time to this great love, photography, that you know where you're beginning. But it's once you pick up the camera, you almost have to let go of all those preconceived ideas, even though, you know, this is what really, you know, makes me tick. And respond so that it doesn't feel forced. So it's a line, it's a balance. I mean, so much, and I think someone had asked me too about that balance between how do you juggle, you know, home life and, you know, a creative life. And for me, like blending the two seems to be the only way I can balance it. And some days it's great, and some days it's terrible, you know, like just finding time. You know, people think I'm making pictures every day. Like, I wish, you know, that it's not always like that. But I think always coming back to, and these journals and mind maps, they keep you on the same page. And that's why I think they're so important, because, you know, life gets in the way, and art, because it's so hard, making pictures is so hard to quantify how much time it would take. It gets to the bottom of everyone's to-do lists, you know, and then you end up doing the laundry before you like sit down with your pictures. And I don't know, I feel like that it's so important to like have these mind maps and these books as a way to keep the projects moving forward.
Love it. Thank you. I think that was a great answer. And thank you for that question, Kent. Next one from Diana Green. How are you combining video, the waves and the lightning bugs? How does this work?
Yeah, so it's a still photograph, but at the same time, typically, not always, but typically I run video at the set with my camera on the tripod, and then it gets combined in in a software. So it varies, but that's typically how it's done. I mean, now there's tons of, I worked on those like 15 years ago, 10, 12 years ago. So now there are GIFs and things like that, which does it all for you, but that's not the way I had made these.
Yeah, which kind of leads on to the next question from Catherine. I noticed you're adding animation to some of the photographs in your presentation. Yeah. Are you using that in your work generally now?
I mean, actually, I had there's not enough time. That's why you have to be in photography for an entire life, or really in anything, like committing yourself to like this one beautiful thing is, there's so many things I want to do still, even after, whatever, 30 something years of making pictures. And, so the animations, I worked on them quite consistently around 2007 through to 2012. So that's 10, 15 years ago now. I have done it less because I think recently, because it's with AI and with GIFs and things like that, that it felt like it was more a world that I'm a traditionalist in many ways, and I want to stay in that real world,
Love it.
Yeah.
Just jumping down a few because some of the questions are very similar. We're running out of time. Can you speak about your commercial work? This is from Corey. For example, your work with Kate Spade.
Yeah. So I used to do a lot more commercial work than I do now, and that's just a matter of time and also logistics. I live in Maine. I don't live in New York or London. There's no, you'd have to travel an editorial. It's just I do book covers still, but that's pretty much. And then on assignment for the Times. But the Kate Spade came about in 2007, and they had basically taken my first color portfolio. You look at me like an emergency, and sort of, taken it and put a clutch bag and underneath the arm of one of their models, and sort of used it as a source of their ideas. And so they had taken my fine art work and then wanted me to sort of recreate it. So the theme was I've always wanted to, and play piano and do this and that and knit a 100-foot scarf. And so it was a very creative act. They were a great company. It was before they were bought by, I think Liz Claiborne bought them, and it sort of became more corporate. So it was really creative, and it was nice. I mean, the thing with being sort of a writer and photographer, as many of you guys know, you're in your own little world, in your own heads. It's very solitary, and I like people. I like to have a laugh, and so for me, it was really great to have a creative team. But it's rare for me, to be honest.
This is just my question now, following on from that, is there a sort of commercial or fashion house or someone that you would like to work with that you thought, I'd be interested? Because I imagine you look at things and think about how you would have approached certain, let's say, campaigns, or do you not look at that and think?
My first love, like, don't get me wrong, commercial work can be so creative and so beautiful. But you're typically in service of selling something. And that is the one thing that I really love about just making your own work, is that the only thing it's in service for is to sell itself, right? Or an idea. Your idea, like it's so beautiful, just that very idea, that it's so pure in many ways that obviously, I mean, I'll hustle if I need to, but and there's lots of companies, I think, that have a very creative outlook. But for me, the beauty of just writing and making work about an idea or for a person is that it's really uncomplicated. It's not trying to coerce anyone into anything other than the idea itself,
Love that. So can you tell us what Peter's bringing to Photo London, what the works are, and if you can tell us a bit about the scale of them, because they are They are quite big, but I'm sure I've seen your work, and I'm sure many people have on this Zoom call, but I suspect some people haven't. And if you could just talk about maybe the framing as well, just to have an idea of what is available to buy.
Well, it's Peter, he's an extraordinary gallerist. He like really knows his mind. So he falls in love with a particular picture, and then he's like, that's the one. And then he'll move on to it. That's the one. And so it's been really fun. I mean, he has a deep, deep, deep love of photography that is just so energetic and inspiring. And, I think is really contagious with how, he feels about the medium. And as he says, it keeps him young. And so I think he's going to show 6 pieces, newer work, either from the new book that's not out yet, with, exploring color and the emotional effects of color, and what it is to feel and to live and to seize the day. And I actually think they're on the smaller size. He is less, every gallery is different, but he's, less of enormous work and more, like these gems, these jeweled gems. And I'm not sure how he's framing it, but it will be exquisite. He does things well. So, yeah.
No, he does. Gosh, so exciting. And will you be here for Photo London? Are you coming?
Well, I'm going to try and come in at the tail end. I've actually, I teach in an MFA program. I've been involved in that program. It's a low resident for 12 years, and it clashes that same week. So I did tell Peter, but I'm going to desperately try and come at the end, so that I can be there to celebrate. It's such a great fair.
It really is. Last question. Are you having any upcoming workshops in America? This is from Nancy Moon.
Since COVID and just the balance of everything, trying to sort of carve out some time to make work, I've actually cut back on my teaching, but I deeply love it. And to share this love of photography with others is like a real calling for me in life. So I'll be doing a couple of online things. Just follow me on my Instagram, or like contact me through my website, cig@cigharvey.com, and I can keep you on a list of when I do run a class. I will be back in person soon doing classes, because there's nothing like just having a laugh and being in the same room, is there? I mean, it's the best. So it will be, soon. I'll announce it, definitely. I think we're going to do something in England, actually, in Dartmoor next year. Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, so follow your Instagram.
Yeah, I'll post it.
Yeah, and sign up to your newsletter via your website.
Well, I've only done one newsletter in 3 years, so if you sign up, when I do, yeah, it will come out. Instagram's better. I'm not very good at just the balance of it all, right?
I hear you. Well, time's up. Thank you so much, Cig. This has been so enjoyable. Oh my gosh, I can't wait to see the work at the fair, what Peter's, how he's framing them, and I hope everyone can join, and who's here in London or visiting. And we look forward to seeing you soon, somewhere in the world.
Yeah, and thank you so much, Brandei, for your questions and for your time. I know you flew back from Dubai today. I owe you a big glass of wine one day soon.
Yeah, we'll sit down.
Yeah, and thank everyone for their generosity of time. Zoom, they can be tough, we all know, and I just appreciate everyone coming, and hopefully you enjoyed it. So thank you.
I loved it. So thank you again. And lastly, big thanks to Photo London for giving us this platform for our discussion. So thank you so much, and have a lovely evening or afternoon wherever you are.
Go make a picture, right?
Yeah. Bye, everyone. Thank you. Bye.